Bonjour à tous et bienvenue sur le podcast Ouvrir une filiale aux États-Unis. Je suis Nicolas Bernard Masson, dirigeant de la société Masson International, société qui représente l'État de Pennsylvanie en France, Suisse et Belgique. Nous recevons dans cet épisode du podcast Kenny Chen, fondateur de Pittsburgh AI et cofondateur de PART, Partnership to Advance Responsible Technology. Kenny va nous parler du marché actuel de l'intelligence artificielle aux États-Unis et des principaux lieux de développement de l'IA aux USA. Enfin, il donnera quelques recommandations aux entreprises internationales qui souhaitent entrer sur ce marché aux États-Unis. N'oubliez pas de vous abonner au podcast sur votre plateforme d'écoute préférée et de laisser votre avis. Je vous souhaite une très bonne écoute. So thank you very much, Kenny, for joining the podcast and this episode. And
thanks for having me.
You're welcome. It's a real pleasure for me, and I will let you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit more about your background.
Absolutely, Nicholas. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Kenny Chen. I am the co-founder of a nonprofit think tank called the Partnership to Advance Responsible Technology, or PART for short. We were founded a couple years ago out of in a response to the United Nations AI for Good initiatives. And we primarily work with a wide range of cross-sector clients and partners, whether in government, private industry, academia, or nonprofits, helping advise on their AI strategies with ethics, policy, and other governance considerations in mind, but then also forming strategic partnerships between local and international organizations that are working in this space. We as PART are based in Pittsburgh, but we work with people across the country and internationally. We also run more grassroots efforts like Pittsburgh AI, which is a community of volunteer-led people just passionate about AI and ensuring that it's accessible and democratically available to people throughout the region. And I'll leave it at that.
And I'm curious, how many members do you have in the PART initiative, and how many members in the Pittsburgh AI community?
Yeah, so in terms of partners for PART, we have so there's 8 core people who came together to found PART as an organization, but we have dozens of organizations that we've worked with over the last year or two. For Pittsburgh AI, we have about 500 or 600 members, within the region, and are constantly growing on that front as well. I guess I should also mention that I am one of the co-founders and serve a role in directing a tri-city partnership called the AI Triangle between Pittsburgh, Boston, and Montreal. So 3 mid-sized research-driven cities with a lot of AI history and competencies. And so we're working together to make sure that entrepreneurship, research, and policy between the cities are also developed collaboratively and for the benefit of the people of our respective regions as well.
And could you explain to our audience what is the state of the AI market in the US, and what is currently the growth of the AI market in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to keep this short because there's really kind of fascinating history and trajectory and all this. But AI has been around for a long time, since the mid 1950s, and cycled through waves of interest and disinterest. Times when people got really excited about the technology, and then there's been at least 2 AI winters in the past when people became a lot more disillusioned, or maybe realistic, about what AI could actually do. But the kind of more recent developments, starting in around 2010, 2012, when AlexNet and some of the what people call convolutional neural networks, deep learning, you might hear in the headlines and those kinds of things. Around the turn into the 2010s of this past decade, a lot of the technology being developed around AI actually started reaching levels where it was useful, where computer vision and image recognition technologies were starting to reach human levels of ability, and similar things with natural language processing, and just applications of AI within enterprise software, all of that kind of stuff. And so I'd say like 2010 to 2015 was this big proof of concept period, when a lot of researchers started realizing hey, this stuff is actually starting to work. The subsequent 5 years, 2016 through 2020, was kind of like this explosion where all of a sudden you're seeing AI in every startup pitch deck or across the headlines. First it's autonomous vehicles hitting the streets, and then it's robots are here to take your jobs. And all along the way, there's ethical considerations where people are getting really concerned with some of the social and economic implications of embedding automation into everything. This idea of just throw AI at it started to come into question. And I think, here, as we're here in 2020, looking into the next 5 years, I think the subject of ethics and the responsible use of AI is going to be a major theme in the way that this market and industry plays out. You look at the way that, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, or the use of AI against protesters in Hong Kong, all around the world, utilization of data mining, facial recognition, predictive policing, algorithmic sentencing and hiring. It's creating major questions for human rights and the preservation of those kinds of values. And it's clearly come to a point where ethical AI needs to be a baseline foundation for how organizations function. And there's a lot of geopolitical maneuvering that is going to come into play as well, determining whether the US, China, or kind of the European plus Canadian standards and centers of impact and influence, which of those are going to win out, or what might we even see from the global south as more companies come through. And I think 2026 to 2030 is when a lot of that battle is going to play out. When you've got 5G networks everywhere, when you've got mass adoption and very sophisticated, mature platforms for scaling AI, that's when we're either going to really make things or really break things. And it's exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Yes. I think the ethics playing a major role in the AI industry could bring another winter, or could just grow the market very rapidly. Yeah. And is the AI market a thing for the big techs, the big large companies, the Google, Amazons, Apple, or do you have a place for small and medium-sized company in the AI market? What's your vision on that, on this future market?
Yeah, absolutely. And no, by no means is the use or development of AI limited to the tech giants, the Googles, Amazons, Microsofts of the world. Now, certainly there's almost no avoiding them, because with Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, so much of how AI is developed and used nowadays is utilizing cloud infrastructure, hosting, processing, and utilizing all of the thousands of tools that these companies have made available to make AI and very sophisticated, powerful processes on those fronts just accessible to their customers around the world. That said, if the giants are creating the platforms, they are still very much reliant. I mean, we are all reliant on specialized, small to medium-sized companies, startups, scale-ups, even tech corporations to develop the actual products that hit those industry verticals, whether it's healthcare, fintech, ag tech, autonomous vehicles, though I guess the giants are all involved in autonomous vehicles as well. So there's a lot of overlap, but it also means a ripe field for acquisitions, partnerships, those kinds of things for companies that are interested. What I'll say to the very small companies or startups, people that don't even feel like they have a place or a role within the AI field, I'd really challenge, questions or any predisposition you might have to like counting yourself out. AI has already been, applied and integrated horizontally across literally every sector and industry. And there's so many off-the-shelf tools that you can apply just in your, in your daily workflow, or it's your logistics and supply chain management, those kinds of things that can at least internally improve your operations. And best practices now definitely include really solid management of your internal data, capture management, operations, governance. So at the very least, there's no excuse to not do a good job with your data.
And in terms of what's your feeling about the AI community and the AI market in the US? Is it a big community, one community, or is it different sub-communities across the industry? So you have, for example, the AI for autonomous vehicles, the AI for medtech, the AI for fintech, for example, or is it just one giant industry and all the people know each other? What's your feeling about that?
No, that's a great question, and part of me kind of wishes that we had a good hive mind that made it easier to share and translate concepts across fields. But the reality is much more of the reverse. Just like in so many other places in industries, it is a very fragmented and siloed community. And you certainly have webs of people who are very well connected. A lot of them happen through academic or industry groups. The academic conferences like NeurIPS or ICML, et cetera, have really strong, 10,000 person plus like attendance and just really good academics. I think all of the major research faculty and the godfathers and mothers of the field are all involved in those kinds of academic conferences, whereas industry groups like the IEEE or ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, they also do a really good job of bringing people together from across different industry verticals. But otherwise, when you're not looking at those kinds of groups that facilitate those connections, it is a lot of the autonomous vehicle people talking to each other, the agricultural robotics people talking to each other, the biomedical, and even within biomed and life sciences, there's probably 1,000 different subdisciplines of people who are using AI for cell cultures versus for like oncology and that kind of stuff. And so part of what my organization was founded to do was help bridge some of those gaps where people don't intuitively come together, but might have really good opportunities to collaborate or share insights.
And you spoke about the AI triangle. What are right now the hotspots, the best places in the US for AI? Are there many places emerging or only few cities? How is it organized?
Yeah. So certainly the AI triangle cities, Pittsburgh, Boston, Montreal. When you look at the universities that are present there, Carnegie Mellon University, MIT, the University of Montreal, etc. Those institutions that have many decades long history of AI development and strong computer science or robotics programs. If you follow those, then you'll almost certainly find the strongest hubs of AI research as well as talent development. And so unsurprisingly, you'll find a lot of that in the Bay Area with Berkeley and Stanford as major drivers. You find a lot of people, orbiting the capital in New York. But I think 2020 has been a really interesting shift, obviously because of COVID and the disruptions in terms of what the actual value of being within a dense urban, metropolitan population looks like. And a lot of the companies that I work with are now definitely reevaluating the need to place themselves in San Francisco, San Jose, New York, etc. And there's a real surge in terms of like the value proposition for what people might otherwise call like secondary or tertiary, second or third tier cities, which are no slouch at all, by the way. There's like the research triangle in Raleigh-Durham. There's the Colorado regions like Denver, Boulder. Texas has a lot going on with Austin, Houston, Dallas, and then certainly Pennsylvania, where your team does such a great job in creating a robust like innovation environment, with Pittsburgh and Philadelphia being major epicenters of both generalized but also very specialized research and innovation. I think for companies looking at the US, anyone should definitely take a look at how the specialization of certain cities fits with the kind of product they're developing, how that product market fit lines up, but then also the kinds of partners and incentives, and even just how welcoming that kind of city and region might be to having them join. And I'll also just give a shout out to Venture for America as a great nonprofit organization that's helping source top university talent and then place them in not the San Franciscos and New Yorks of the world, but those rise of the rest cities like Baltimore, Cleveland, Kansas City, St. Louis, in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are part of those as well. So I think Venture for America does a good job with those. And then obviously Amazon HQ2, when they were doing their whole search, there was a lot of cities that certainly made that bid and made themselves transparent.
And for the foreign companies that are coming to the US, do they need to consider certain aspects of the US market before entering? Do you have specific regulations regarding that? Do you have something that they need to think about before choosing Pittsburgh as a location, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when we come to regulations, at the very least, the U.S. regulations on data governance and some of those kinds of things tend to be less strict than what you have in the EU. Certainly like with GDPR being a big thing from a few years ago, but generally the kind of privacy and security types of regulations are a bit looser in the US. And so there's certainly a lot of homework and due diligence to be done, and it certainly makes it a bit more complicated when you look at the differences between states across the US. The US is certainly not a homogeneous kind of business environment, and being really thoughtful about understanding the costs and benefits of certain regulatory restrictions versus like tax incentives, and the way that like local partners might help. This is all part of the kind of calculus that needs to be done. But that's exactly why organizations like the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, or the national organizations like the U.S. Commercial Service, those kinds of organizations exist. Like their job is to help foreign companies navigate this whole process. So I think step one is to consider what you're moving to the US for. Is it for accessing talent, capital, business development, certain partnerships, strategic investment, those kinds of things, and square all of that. But then step two, which might even be step one, is to talk to somebody at one of these agencies who really know their stuff and can help navigate the process. And
let's say, for example, the foreign company, the European company, they find a location, they find a perfect location with a university, with an incubator for their US sales office. Do you have an idea for them who would be the biggest customers for them when they land on the US market? Is it better for them to target large customers or smaller ones? I know you work with a lot of startups, and who do they sell to? And how they do that, their business development?
Yeah, I think there's certainly no one size fits all when it comes to navigating that kind of sales environment, and it differs so much depending on which part of the country you're on. If you're on the East or West Coast and you've got very sophisticated tech corporations, whether you are talking about like the Amazons, the Googles of the world, or it's like Oracle and those kinds of software companies, certainly all of those, if you've developed a novel and well-tested solid software product, or that kind of a thing, they are going to talk to you. And whether it's a matter of like being a customer or like acquiring you down the road, that kind of thing, for sure. I think once you delve into more more specialized plays, enterprise software, different kinds of SaaS companies that are coming in. If you're looking at kind of middle market companies, it's not the Fortune 500 or that kind of a thing. I think there's a huge variance of potential customers who, even over the last 5 years, understand that there's a gap that they need to overcome between themselves and the leaders in their competition. And a lot of companies have been struggling to really revamp and drive the internal processes to get their product innovation pipeline and process, or even their internal talent up to speed and up to par with their industry leaders. I think this especially holds true for more like legacy industries, or ones where companies have been around for decades or even more than centuries. You can look at oil and gas or retail. There's a lot of movement right now in supply chain and logistics that might be quite a bit further ahead. But in health and life sciences, outside of like the giant hospitals and those kinds of health insurance systems, you've got a lot of smaller players that really need to revamp their operations, but can't pay like the millions of dollars for some of these larger tiers. So there's so much room for disruption and for entry into these markets where they're needed, but it does require a good amount of homework and just thoughtful networking and exploration.
And for the AI companies, for the European companies that they want to find their first customers in the US, do you have major trade shows that you would recommend? Or do you have, for example, in Pittsburgh, some major events that they could travel to find their first customers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly the US has historically had a lot of the world's largest and highest profile trade shows and events. And, just as much, it's been disrupted by COVID, and, the challenge of engaging in those things and, traveling in person to derive the value of those in-person trade shows, that's all come into question more recently. There's a lot of things that are happening virtually, and we'll see how well they're able to offer the same kind of like value to participants. But I certainly recommend that people take advantage of how much more accessible the entire global market of trade shows, events, conferences, summits, those kinds of things have been made during this time. And I suspect that they'll remain virtually accessible for at least another year or two to come, if not permanently. But what you mentioned, CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, that one's definitely great. It's in my hometown of Las Vegas, so I always appreciate people going there. And even beyond that, I recommend that people check out the CTA, the Consumer Technology Association, which is the organization that runs CES, because they have a lot of really helpful and interesting resources from their end. You also have the South by Southwests of the world, if you want to go like to the top tier of like the largest number of people and participation. You have definitely a lot of the specialized conferences, and I do highly recommend anyone who is looking seriously at the AI ecosystem, whether you're looking at the O'Reilly AI conferences in New York, or it's more of the academic conferences like NeurIPS and ICML. I'll put a personal plug for the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit that is being hosted in Pittsburgh in 2021. It'll most likely happen in July of 2021. We're in the process of finalizing the dates, but you can also tune into this year's version, 2020, on September 4th and 5th, I believe, and that's at gmisummit.com. But the whole theme is utilizing, AI, robotics, advanced technologies to help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, while also driving, leading edge industry innovation and those kinds of things. I'll also put give a shout out for the UN's AI for Good platform. I think the URL is aiforgood.itu.int. High profile AI kind of cross sector conference that usually happens in Geneva once a year, but has been moved to a year-long cycle of programs. Lots of interesting content being developed there between ITU and XPRIZE. One of their partners is World Summit AI. So another great, AI conference that takes a good combination of academic, industry, and policy folks and brings them together. I could probably go on, but I should probably stop here.
No, that's fine. I'd like for you to maybe, as we are wrapping up this episode, give your contact details and maybe speak about Pittsburgh AI if you are launching some initiatives or virtual events right now. I don't know, but if you would like to share that with our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would love for anyone who's interested to reach out. You can reach me at Kenny at responsabletech.ai. Or find us online, on LinkedIn, all of that. For Pittsburgh AI, the URL is pretty simple. It's just PGH.AI. And we do have an event coming up in August focused on reskilling, during and post-COVID. And we're trying to do that in coordination with the new XPRIZE competition. It's a $5 million rapid reskilling XPRIZE that's asking people to utilize a combination of technologies to help rapidly reskill or upskill employees into high demand employment areas within 60 days. So highly recommend that people check that out as well at xprize.org.
Great, super. Thank you very much, Kenny, for your time and for this wonderful episode. A lot of interesting information for foreign companies and European companies that want to set up shop in the US in the AI industry. I think you're one of the best experts we have in the Pittsburgh region, for sure. So thank you very much for your time, Kenny. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. It's an exciting time for anyone to be entering this space. It's not too late, and there's a lot of impact and opportunity that you can pursue. So best of luck, and thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you.